Hello, welcome to session 2 of the Welcome Course. This week our topic is what does Christianity teach? So we're going to look at some of the key ideas behind the Christian faith as we have understood it for 2,000 years. You'll remember that the framework that we're using for this course is something called the Baptismal Covenant, which we'll find in the Book of Common Prayer. And we're looking at these first 3 questions in the Baptismal Covenant. You remember last week I said there were 8 questions. The first 3 are about what we believe. The second 5 are about how we live. And for this second week, we're still going to be looking at those first 3 questions of what we believe. Let's look at this idea of a creed. Now, it's from the Latin for I believe. Credo is I believe in Latin, and that's the first word of the creeds in Latin. Obviously, we don't have them in Latin, we have them in English, but that's where the word comes from for the creed. And they're useful because they set some parameters on what is considered traditional Orthodox Christianity and what is considered outside those parameters. So this is what we as the Christian Church for 2,000 years have held to be the most central issues. An obvious question when confronting a creed is, well, can I say yes to all of this? On a Sunday morning when we say one version of the creed, can I say all of it if I'm not completely 100% sure of all of those phrases? And the answer to that is yes. This is not necessarily what you yourself believe, although they are goals I think we should be aiming at in our personal lives, but they are what the church has handed down, and as part of the church, this is our establishment, if you like. So all Christian churches have creeds. Roman Catholic Church, the Lutherans, ourselves, Protestant denominations such as the Methodists, Baptists, we all have these creeds in common. And their purpose is to set this foundation which the church is built on. Now, as we recite them, something mystical happens, I think. Simply in saying these words, we kind of consolidate our belief in them. And we find ourselves saying them, actually moving deeper into a place of commitment and confession. So they have this other reason as well. And they've been around really since the time of the apostles. Those are the disciples of Jesus who founded the church after his death and resurrection. And it's thought that the oldest creed that there was the simple phrase, Jesus is Lord. So when Christians would get together in the earliest years, the earliest days even, after the resurrection, to worship God, they would be united by this one confession, these 3 words, that Jesus is Lord. It took about 300 years for the church, as it was at that time, to come together in a number of councils and actually decide formally what was Orthodox, what was Christian, and what was not. And the way they did it was to look at what the tradition was in those 300 years, as it had been handed down from one generation to another. And they formalized the creeds in writing in the 4th century. And so this is what we have as the foundation to our faith, the Apostles' Creed. I won't recite it because you can read it yourself, and if you have a prayer book, you'll be able to find it quite easily if you look at the service of morning prayer, which starts on around page 90 to 100, something like that. You'll see this in a very readable format. Something that I ask the group to do at this point is to get into a couple of small groups and write a creed. And not a creed of what we ourselves believe, or what they themselves believe, but what our society holds to be a true statement. So society, if you think about it, if you peep below the surface, there are certain foundational thoughts which underpin, a Western, modern, capitalist democracy such as ours. I ask people to just sort of think about what some of those foundational ideas are, and some of them, are not incompatible with Christianity. Some of them are good and right and healthy and proper. Some of them, though, when you go a bit deeper, you find just conflict a little bit with what it is that we believe as Christians, or what it is you believe as an individual person. So what I've done is to put together a creed of what I see as the values and beliefs of our society as it is at this moment. So here it is. I believe in wealth, the provider almighty, creator of pleasure and joy. I believe in happiness, its only child, our goal. It is conceived by the power of possessions and born in the acquiring of stuff. It suffers under taxation, is crucified, dies, and is buried when I don't get my own way. It descends to the dead when people don't like me. On the weekend, it rises again. It will come again on vacation, holiday weekends, and the new series of Dancing with the Stars. I believe in football, looking after number one, doing unto others before they do it unto me, and that the Real Housewives of New Jersey really are real. So that's tongue-in-cheek, and if I were speaking at a different time, I probably wouldn't be as kind of critical as this piece of work is, but I just thought I'd give you a bit of a smile, as well as making a serious point that, it's not like there are believers and non-believers. Everybody believes in something, and every society is founded on certain propositional beliefs which give life to that community and civilization. And I think these are some of ours in the Western world. So if that's the way it is, and if we have a set of beliefs as Christians which are distinctive, which kind of are different from many of the attitudes and beliefs in the society around us, it really begs the question of how do we live as people in a society which at times will be kind of challenging to our faith, and we will be kind of challenging to some of the ideas around amongst the people that we live and move with. Now, the Episcopal Church has responded to surrounding culture in two or three ways as history has developed. There is a way of responding to culture which is to embrace it and to identify with it so much that actually we become pretty indistinguishable from the values and beliefs of the society around us. So the society's attitude to money, well, that's my attitude as well. Society's attitude to peace and war, well, that's my attitude as well. Society's attitude to getting my pleasure through sensory experiences, well, that's also my attitude. And some churches do that, so that actually when you look at the lifestyles of a church, you can tell no real difference between that and the people who don't go to that church. So that's one way in which we can respond. We can actually take on the values and beliefs of the society around us and be pretty much indistinguishable. So we can be just as materialistic, power-seeking, authoritarian, violent, exclusive, and prejudicial as anybody else. And you can surely think of times when we as the Christian church have failed to be distinctive in important ways. Another way to do it is to become separate from society, to withdraw from society so much that actually we're not really a part of it anymore. So it can lead to a sort of a suspicion of entertainment, of dancing, of going to the cinema, of rock and roll, of certain styles of dress. When taken to an extreme, that withdrawal can be so complete that we see it in sects like the Amish, for example, who, depending on the strictness of their community, will reject modernity to varying degrees. In the most restrictive form, communities that will not have telephones or electricity or use, the internal combustion engine at any time in their business or in their personal lives. I lived formerly in Pennsylvania, in South Pennsylvania, not quite in Lancaster County, but close to it. And I would come across many Amish people. Some of them would use electricity in their business life, so they might have a phone in their barn and might have like a freezer if they had a grocery store and a fridge. But in their homes, they might not have those items. So that would be like the extreme example, I guess, of a Christian church that says, let's withdraw from society because society, has temptations and factors which are going to be detrimental to us as a community of believers. And then there is a third part, and you'll have guessed that this is the way I see the Episcopal Church, and that is to be engaged with our society, not to withdraw from it, but not to become absorbed in it either, so that we act as people who are part of the society, who are taking part in creating the culture and shaping the culture, enjoying the culture as well, but are also challenging the culture at certain points. So the Anglican Church, when it formed in the 16th century, had this idea of talking up, if you like, the doctrine of the incarnation. So the idea that God became a human being at Christmas time and grew up as a fully human person and experienced everything within life demonstrates without question that God accepts the material universe, that the material universe cannot be sinful. If it were sinful, God could not become a part of it as the man Jesus. So at the foundation of our beliefs then, this idea that, if God could become part of the material world and have a career and have a language and speak publicly and give sermons to people and have relationships, then all of these things cannot in and of themselves be harmful. Otherwise, God would not take on those things. God would not experience them for God's self. So, using that doctrine, you'll find that many of history's, since about the 15th century, 16th century, many of the greatest English authors, writers, artists, playwrights, filmmakers, musicians, composers, songwriters, have come from the Anglican tradition. In the North American incarnation of it, the Episcopal Church. Which is why I think many Episcopal churches that you find, including St. Paul's, enjoy the arts. We have a fine music program because we believe that God became a human being and enjoyed human culture. And human culture is there to be enjoyed and also to be used as a tool for the glory of God. Now, where did this come from, this Episcopal Anglican approach to the wider culture? Well, it came from our very beginning in the Reformation. So a little bit of history for you now. If you like English history, you're going to enjoy this. Personally, I don't, because for me, English history was schoolwork, and who likes that? So I hope you find it a little more interesting than I do. But the Reformation in Europe, you had reformers on the mainland of Europe, largely the first one, the German theologian Martin Luther. Those are his dates, the end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century. And his great gift to the worldwide church was to say that that people are put right with God not by performing religious duties, but by their faith. That's what puts them right with God. He went back to the New Testament and saw that that was perhaps the main teaching of Paul in his letters, that we are not put right with God by religious observance, but by faith. At a time when the Catholic Church in Europe had become kind of corrupt, in as much as it had been trying to raise money by selling ancient artifacts and guaranteeing people that this would be impressive to God, that God would take years off your time in purgatory if you purchased certain relics. So clearly, a corruption, and all institutions become corrupt over time, and the Christian church was no exception. So Luther comes along, looks again at the New Testament with fresh eyes, and says, wait a minute, buying stuff off the church doesn't impress God and isn't going to do any good in your eternal situation. What matters, according to the Bible, is faith. And Scripture not interpreted by the church. Scripture alone, stripped of all the dogma that has built up around it over 1,500 years. So he wanted to have the Bible in the vernacular, in people's native language, and he translated it into German. He also thought that, people can get to God without the church. Priests, wearing these collars, they're not necessary for people to have a faith in God and a relationship with God. The priesthood of all believers was the phrase that they used. So that was then the European Reformation on the main continent. In England, things were slightly different. Let me just explain what happens in English history. Henry VIII, you've all heard of him. What's important for a king at this time in history is having a son. A daughter is, it's okay if you have to have one, but what's really important is that you can continue your lineage, your dynasty, through your male heirs. Henry VIII is married to Catherine of Aragon, who is a Spanish queen. And she will not provide a son for him. She has a daughter. She has has a daughter whose name is Mary. But that's not good enough for Henry, and he begins to kind of explore other avenues. In other words, affairs. He has an affair with Anne Boleyn, and he wants to divorce Catherine and marry Anne. The church, the Pope, says, no, you can't do that. And in response to that, Henry VIII says, well, I'm going to leave the Roman Church and set up the English Church, which will be independent of Rome, and I will be the head of the English Church. He does that, and the Church of England is born. But as you can tell, it's not a theological thing, it's a political thing. That's what causes the English Church to start. Now, Anne Boleyn doesn't provide Henry with a son either. She provides him with another daughter whose name is Elizabeth. Now, Anne Boleyn is a Protestant. She joins Henry in that break from Rome. But Henry eventually dies in the year 1547. Now, he does actually have a son. He is the son of Catherine Parr, I believe. Sorry about this, memory's not quite as good as it should be. Who is a Protestant. And so Henry produces a son, Edward VI, but he is only 9 when his father dies. So he becomes king at the age of 9, and he's a Protestant in the shape of his father and his mother. Americans think they have problems with their heads of state from time to time, but at least you haven't had one who's only 9. So, Edward VI becomes king. He is a sickly child, and he dies at the age of 15 in 1553. So, at the age of 15, clearly no heirs. He does actually, before he dies, do one or two things, including founding my high school, which is there. Still looks like that. And he dies in 1553. Now, there are no male heirs to Henry after Edward, and so the line of succession goes to the girls. And so the oldest daughter becomes the Queen of England. That is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, a Catholic from Spain. And so Mary, her daughter, is also a Catholic, and she becomes Queen of England, Queen Mary I. And she is ruthless in trying to restore Catholicism to England. She earned the nickname Bloody Mary, and it's because she, carried out a fairly comprehensive and violent overturning of the new Church of England to put it back to the Roman Church. So, now, she dies childless. Now, that's obviously a bad thing for the Roman Catholics in England. It's a good thing for the Protestants in England, because the succession then goes to her little sister, her half-sister, who is the daughter of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, and that's Elizabeth. Elizabeth I, a Protestant. And she begins, as you'll know from your own general knowledge, begins a reign of a golden age in English history. There are military victories against the French and the Spanish. It's a time of unprecedented peace and prosperity for the English people. Within just 4 years of her death, the English land at Jamestown, Virginia, and the empire takes off. The first permanent settlement of the English in North America. So this is a golden age for the English. And something that Mary tries to do is to establish unity across England. You've had a Catholic king who became a Protestant. Then you had a Protestant king, then you had a Catholic queen who undid all those reforms. Now you've got a Protestant queen again. Lots of people have died. There have been lots of violent conflicts. And so to establish a settled country where everyone is at peace, what do? Well, you establish a church for the whole people. So the very kind of small idea of the Church of England, born under Henry for political purposes, begins to have something with some theological intent. Elizabeth sets about establishing a church for the English people. Whether you're Catholic at one end or Puritan at the other, this will be a church for all of England. And it needs a theological basis if it is to take root amongst the English people and have the loyalty of Catholics and Puritans. So there are some distinctive characteristics that the English church establishes. At this time, all you had was Catholics and Puritans, Catholics and Protestants. Catholics would say that the church is the way that we understand the will of God. You know, what the church says, what tradition is, that's the truth. That's how God reveals God's mind in the tradition of the church. But the Puritans, the Protestants, said, no. The way God reveals God's heart and mind is through the Bible. That's how, not through the church. So you have these two irreconcilable traditions, and the glory of the new English church is to say, well, hang on, God does reveal God's heart through the church and tradition, and also God, yes, reveals God's mind through the Bible, but there is a third way in which God reveals God's mind and heart. All truth is God's truth. So there is scientific truth, artistic truth, the truth about law, the truth about nature, and all of these ways are also ways in which God reveals the truth to human beings. No one had said this before. So this is a brand new theology that is being born in England under the reign of Elizabeth I. And its key idea is that we can be Catholic and have this kind of authority that comes from the church. We can also be Protestant and have an authority that comes from the Bible, and we can be distinctive because we can see that all of God's creation is a way in which God communicates the truth to his people. And that is the genius of the Church of England, which became, in North America, the Episcopal Church. So, that is why we, as Episcopalians, as Anglicans, because, of course, when 1776 comes along, the English church that's in the 13 colonies, which is the Church of England. I mean, this is part of Britain, these 13 colonies, and so they have the established Church of England in there. To the north, of course, New England, it's a bit more puritanical, but to the south, from D.C. southwards, it's largely the Church of England that is dominating those states: Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. Real Church of England stuff, and also to a lesser part, New York and New Jersey, and then it's a bit more Puritan, sort of in the New England part of the 13 colonies. 1776 comes along, and the Church of England can't be the Church of England in the 13 colonies anymore. This is now an independent country, and the Church of England in these 13 states now become kind of independent. They keep all of the prayer book, they keep all of the doctrines of the Church of England, they keep all of the way of ordering the church, but they can no longer have the Queen, or the King at least, as the head of the church. Now it's going to be sort of autonomous, and be sort of self-directed, but still have this very, very intimate relationship with the Church of England. That exists today still, which is why people like me can be ordained in the Church of England and come over here to the Episcopal Church, and it's exactly the same. The only difference is really that in the Church of England, Queen Elizabeth II is still the head of the church, and over here, there isn't a head of the church. The people are the head of the church. So that's a little bit of church history for you. I hope you found that interesting, and I hope you can begin to see how it is that we in the Episcopal Church, have kind of slightly more open minds than some kinds of Christians. That's one of the things we're kind of known for, is being perhaps at the cutting edge of new ideas in theology and of being open to how science and sociology and psychology and history and nature can be ways in which God moves us on in certain directions, and not just rely on tradition of the church or scripture as the Roman Catholics and the evangelical Protestants rely on. One final topic for today is this. I wanted to say a few words about church. Is it possible to be a Christian without going to church? And the very clear and loud answer I want to give is it absolutely is possible to be a Christian and not go to church. As Luther says, and we are part of that Reformation stream, it's faith that puts us right with God, not religious observance. So going to church doesn't actually put you right with God, but neither does not going to church stop you being a disciple of Jesus and in relationship with God. But church does have some really helpful things about it, which we as Christians will want to avail ourselves of if we're going to make the most of our discipleship. Stability. This idea that, here's something that's been handed down for thousands of years. It's stood the test of time. It has a kind of authority which has come from just its longevity, and that provides stability. People who leave the conventional, organized church and set up their own churches can go badly wrong, so badly wrong that they end up becoming kind of dehumanizing cults where, death and terrible things happen, as well as, people being manipulated by the leader of the cult to do certain things. So stability is a wonderful thing in our religious practice, rather than going off and floating off into something bizarre that's going to be harmful. The test of time, it's another way of saying what I'm talking about, I guess. If something is new in kind of religious thinking, I tend to be kind of skeptical. Okay, so convince me. 2,000 years, there have been new things cropping up. They've survived a short while, and then they've disappeared because God reveals truth in time as well. A place for mutual support. A place where you can be real, where there are people who are walking with you the same journey, supporting you, befriending you, praying for you, giving you advice, listening to you when things are going badly. That's a really, really important factor in the Christian church. And we in this part of the world, as a suburb of the metropolis, we could do with a bit more of this, really, because, anxiety and stress are at epidemic proportions in our suburbs and city. And if we developed more of a kind of a network of support amongst ourselves as a Christian community, I think that would be a great help to very many people. And it's a place to serve as well. Life is not just about what I get out of it. It's about how can I give to a community. and within the church, that there's a community there that you can serve. There are people in need. There are things that we can do together to help not just ourselves, but the wider society. And there's solidarity. It's hard to believe on your own. Sometimes standing, sitting, or kneeling in a community and sharing faith together, it gives you a real fillip, a real, buzz, and consolidates what you think, and, it can give you confidence and make you stronger as you try to live your faith outside the life of the church. So that's it for week 2. I hope you found that stimulating, and I look forward to seeing you in week 3.